Fantasy Brains!
The Houston Texans are one of the most polarizing teams in the NFL. They have an all-pro quarterback, in my opinion, with CJ Stroud, who a lot of people would say had a sophomore slump. I don't really think so. I think that was really due to the poor O-line play. And shocker as it is, the O-line is also going to be atrocious this year. But they also have a terrific wide receiver room and a lot to talk about when it comes to who is going to be the dominant number 2 receiver behind Nico Collins. And I'm excited to discuss all this information today with episode 11 of the 32 team series. Hopefully you've been with us for episodes 1 through 10, but we're going to be discussing the Houston Texans today. Going to be going over their full offense, looking at stuff like projecting their fantasy outcomes compared to where they're getting drafted, looking at the depth chart changes from last year to this year, looking at their strength of schedule, and then a couple storylines that could change the course of the season. And then before we get started, make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts at Leatherbrains and check us out on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, and you can go check out the rest of our videos at Leatherbrains Podcast. Again, that's on YouTube as well as Spotify. But like I said, we're going to get right into this one with the Houston Texans, a team that I've been waiting to talk about for a while because, like I mentioned in the intro, CJ Stroud, a lot of people out there have been saying sophomore slump. He didn't look as good as he did his rookie year. Is he still, the chosen one, as some might say? Is he still a top 5 to 7 quarterback? And I think he is. I mean, from what I saw with CJ Stroud last year, he definitely struggled at times. But to put this into perspective, CJ Stroud was getting pressured at the same rate all season that Patrick Mahomes did in the Super Bowl. And we all watched that Super Bowl. We all saw how he was getting destroyed by the Eagles D-line. That was what was happening to CJ Stroud all year. And then the Texans go out and they trade their all-pro left tackle, Laramie Tunsil, who was definitely not helping the issue last year. So they got a lot in return. They're, in their eyes, I guess, building it back up. But with this team, it's going to be very similar to how it looked last year. So there's going to be very similar expectations. I think they're going to be a little bit better. But looking at the rest of the depth chart, like I said, we have CJ Stroud coming in. And with that down year last year, only 20 touchdowns. I think that was the big thing because Joe Mixon had a really good season last year with 12 touchdowns in only 14 games played. Had about 1,300 total yards, a little bit under 40 receptions. And there's been news of Joe Mixon recent that he has a foot injury that has been deemed as a frustrating foot injury. And that is just never something that you want to hear about one of your guys in camp, especially if you've already drafted your team. If you haven't been dynasty, whatever that is not good. So, kind of looking at who are the backs behind him right now, you have freshly signed Nick Chubb out of Cleveland. Now, we all know about Nick Chubb. He was the top running back in the league. Now he's not the same guy anymore. He had a gruesome injury back against the Steelers. I believe it was 2 years ago, sat out most of last year. And I think, most doctors are saying he'll never be what he used to be. But right now in training camp, they've been saying that he's getting the bulk of the carries with the first team offense. Looking at the other running backs on their depth chart, they have Dameon Pierce, former 4th round pick who's on the PUP list. And then you have Woody Marks, a day 3 pick out of USC, a smaller back that can kind of do it all, leans more on the receiving side, but it's a pretty ugly backfield. Joe Mixon, if we had done this video earlier, even when he was healthy, I think that I still would have said he's not a great pick in fantasy. And just to be clear, these rumors of him having this injury, it doesn't mean that he is out any games. They're still saying they expect him to be ready by week 1. But I usually do start to see patterns with these where they linger over a long amount of time, and that it's realistic that we might not see Joe Mixon until week 5 or even week 6. So just something to keep wary about when, you're drafting. I made a couple TikToks about guys I'd rather have over him in his range, such as James Conner, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Travion Henderson, maybe even Caleb Johnson. Guys I'd rather have over him in this range just because of the injury risk coming into his age 29 season. Looking at the receivers, you have baby Julio Jones, Nico Collins coming in, missed 5 games last year and still had 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. He is an absolute monster. He's 6'4", can run past you. He's got 4.3 speed. And he's really put it together as a receiver, becomes CJ Stroud's number 1 target in this offense. And, he's joined by a couple rookies out of Iowa State with Jayden Higgins, the 34th overall pick, profiles more as a contested catch, deep threat, big bodied receiver. He had 87 catches last year for 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. And I think this pick was pretty surprising because, you have Nico Collins on this Texans team. You have, Tank Dell's out for the year, but you bring in Christian Kirk. You have John Mechie, who a lot of people really like. And they still go out there and they take a receiver at the 34th pick when, again, their O-line has been bad for the last few years now. So you get Jayden Higgins, and then they end up doubling down and drafting his teammate in the third round, Jalen Noel, who is the slot receiver in that offense and is going to try to win the slot job, I'm guessing, against Christian Kirk in this offense. He was a round 3 pick out of Iowa State. And he put up very similar numbers to Jayden Higgins with 80 catches for 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. So these guys put up almost identical production, which is interesting because Higgins gets drafted a little bit over a full round earlier and, is being drafted a lot higher than Noel. So it'll definitely be interesting to look at that. And then you have Christian Kirk, who hasn't really been relevant since 2023 or even 2022 to make that. But he was traded from the Jaguars for a 7th round pick. And at least the start of the season, I think we should see a heavier snap share for him. But I mean, with how often he's been getting injured as of late, I don't think we can rely on him as a long-term option. At the tight end position, we got nothing special here. Dalton Schultz had about 50 catches, 500 yards, and a couple touchdowns last year. But I do really like the backup on this team. Cade Stover from Ohio State, second-year tight end, has never really done anything in the NFL yet, but he was college teammates with CJ Stroud. Schultz is coming up, second year out of his 3-year deal. I think that they're going to start getting Stover a little bit more involved this season. And I think he's going to end up being their tight end of the future. So not going to talk about him much in this episode, but for you dynasty guys out there, Cade Stover is a name to stash in those deeper leagues, a tight end that's going to be part of a very high volume offense. And then I talked about the O-line. I mean, it was atrocious last year. It was bottom 1 in the NFL, at least in pass protection. And then you go out and trade Laramie Tunsil. So this unit is going to make or break the team. And so let's get on now to the projections and kind of how I have this team finishing this year. So I have Stroud having a really good season. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think that he did slump last year. I think he's the perfect quarterback you want. He's smart. He has great touch on his passes. He can make every throw in the book. What the O-line has to do is give him time to make plays. And then I think the other part of the issue last year was Nico Collins goes down for 5 games. Stephon Diggs tears his ACL. Tank Dell smashes his leg in week 12. I mean, he just never had a healthy group of receivers. And now they get 2 rookies coming in that are both great players. You get Nico Collins. You get Christian Kirk. There's a lot of depth on this team. So I really like what they're putting together. I have the Texans and CJ Stroud passing for about 3,874 yards and 33 touchdowns with about a little bit over 360 completions. So I'm very high on CJ Stroud. I have him finishing as my quarterback 14. He's going as the quarterback 17 right now. And, that seems really high for the amount of, really low for the amount of production he has. But the thing you do have to remember with CJ Stroud is he does not provide that rushing upside that a lot of those other quarterbacks provide, especially the younger ones, where Stroud's just never really going to run the ball. So compared to guys like Caleb Williams, Drake May, Bo Nix, a bunch of rookies from last year, they all are going to have a little bit higher of a rushing upside than him, which could propel them over him in my current rankings. Not to say that I have them, but just kind of giving examples. But like I mentioned, if the O-line can give him some time in the pocket with this new receiver core that they have, I think that DeMeco Ryans is going to let Stroud sling it this year. I mean, you're talking about a frustrating injury with Joe Mixon, a bad offensive line, especially when it comes to run blocking. I think that they're going to let Stroud air it out, and that might mean that he throws a lot of picks, but it also means that he's going to throw for a lot of yards and hopefully a lot of touchdowns. So I really like CJ Stroud. I think he's a great player to have in leagues this year. Like I said, I have him as my quarterback 14, but I think that his floor as a player is a little bit higher than some of the guys being drafted around him. So bet on the talent that CJ Stroud is. Looking at Joe Mixon, I haven't moved him down at all in my rankings. I still got him as my RB21. And again, all these rankings that we did make are based off stats. We picked out the target shares for each team and how we project each player to get a certain amount of target share and how those yards that we put for each team calculate with that target share. So with Joe Mixon, he calculates out to the running back 21. But him sitting out of training camp due to a frustrating foot injury is just that is just the biggest statement of stay away, red flag, red flag, red flag. You have to get rid of him if you have him. I just don't think there's a situation this year where you get consistent play out of him, even if he is able to come back and play a couple weeks for you. If you're going to tell me that that foot injury isn't going to come back or a different injury, I would be so shocked. So I think Mixon is an easy sell right now and an easy fade in drafts. I think he's the one player on this offense that I really don't want any part of. And I think he benefited a lot last year from a heavy touchdown dose that I'm hoping at least will go to CJ Stroud. And so with this running back room, I only have them rushing for about 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns. So I'm predicting this team to be one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL, with the poor O-line, the poor set of running backs, and I think the high passing volume. Now, the one thing that will go in the running back's favor is this Houston Texans defense is probably going to be top 5 again. So that means a lot of opportunities. It means that they're going to be winning the game, which always is good for the game script for running back. So that is the one plus that you have with these guys. Looking at Nick Chubb, I got him as my running back 58, currently going as the RB 49. Now he's definitely risen since this Joe Mixon news has come up, but I do really like Nick Chubb's upside in terms of heavy volume if Mixon misses time. But again, this is Nick Chubb. Like, we know what he brings as a player, and to know that you're only going to get 80% out of that is just not great. He could go out there and give the Texans 18 carries for 60 to 70 yards, and that might be great for them. But that's 6 to 7 fantasy points because we all know Nick Chubb doesn't catch passes. And so when you're talking to a running back who doesn't catch passes, that's coming off a almost career-ending injury for most, in his age 28, 29 season, the volume's there, but if anything, I would let him have one good week and then sell him right away for a running back that has a little bit higher upside, that is a little bit more talented. But people like him right now, so no hate to those people. I get with the volume and I get, the nostalgic feeling with Chubb, but I just personally, I don't think he is going to be the guy this year. And then I think, Woody Marks, you're not drafting him. I think that, you're in best ball leagues, maybe you give him around 18 flyer, but he's not a player that you're going to be stashing on your redraft teams. I think that he does have some sneaky receiving upside, especially if Mixon does miss time. But until he really proves that, I don't think he's worth a roster spot at the moment. But looking at the receivers, which are obviously the most interesting part of this team, Nico Collins is going as the receiver 8. I have him as my receiver 8. But this guy could easily finish inside the top 5. I'm sure a lot of people out there saw one of my takes, which was kind of a bold take that Nico Collins would be a top 3, even potentially top 1 fantasy receiver and lead the NFL in receiving yards. I think it's definitely in the realm of possibilities. I mean, if CJ Stroud can get some time, if Collins can stay healthy, I think that Nico Collins could have an absolute monster season. So, I got him at receiver 8, but I got him barely behind the 4 to 5 guys behind him. So I think Nico Collins is an absolute smash play this year. And I think that adding these other receivers from Iowa State with Jayden Higgins and Jalen Noel, that's going to open up the field a little bit more because teams are going to have to focus on those receivers as well instead of just doubling Nico Collins every single play. So definitely something to keep in mind with Collins is that I think the upside is definitely there. He has the big time weekly upside as well. And I think he's just going to be an absolute smash of an end of first round, early second round selection. Looking at Jayden Higgins, who's going to be the next receiver, I got him as my receiver 62 on the season. He is going as the receiver 51. I think he's a good prospect. I was semi-impressed by him. I'm not in love with his type of receiver where, he's not really a good route runner, but can make really good contested catches, knows how to track the ball, uses his size. So I think he's a good player, but at the end of the day, I think he is a very high floor, low ceiling player in this offense. Now, I think that's great for his price. You're getting him in the receiver 50s and maybe even early 60s. And for a receiver 2 on a high powered offense like this, he could end up being similar to like what Devonta Smith is on the Philadelphia Eagles. But I do think that Higgins does have a lot more value if you do draft CJ Stroud. So if you can get a CJ Stroud, Jayden Higgins combo in a best ball format, I think that's great because I think there will be weeks where Higgins scores a touchdown, but I think he's going to be very inconsistent for those regular redraft leagues. And he's definitely worth being rostered, but I don't think he's going to provide too much value down the road, at least on a week to week basis where you're going to feel confident starting him. And then I got Jalen Noel here as my receiver 76. He's going as the receiver 77. And he is a very, very, very interesting player to me because he could easily win the slot job in this offense. And I love slot receivers in the NFL. I mean, it's just easier for a quarterback to target a player over the middle that's a lot closer to them than throwing all the way on the outside. It gives them less of a chance of getting picked. You're going after the linebackers and the safeties as opposed to the cornerbacks on the outside. So the slot receiver can be the quarterback's best friend. Now, I think Christian Kirk starts the season as a slot receiver, but I think if Noel can prove that he's a good player and go out there, make some plays, or Christian Kirk goes down, I think Jalen Noel can be an absolute value this year in fantasy football. I think that, his talent is there. He produced just as much as Jayden Higgins at ISU, and he's getting drafted rounds later. Just because Higgins is going to be favored to win that outside slot across from Nico Collins, but I think in Dynasty, I like Jalen Noel a lot. I think he's going to be a very solid player for the long run. And I think, with his price, he is going to be a great Dynasty stash. For this year, again, you're not going to be rostering him in redraft leagues, but I do think in best ball formats where you get CJ Stroud, or even without CJ Stroud, to be honest, with his price, I think he's definitely worth a flyer here and there. Christian Kirk, I got him as my receiver 75. He's going really high as the wide receiver 55. And I will say, underrated player, done some good things in Jacksonville and Arizona. And like I mentioned, he could start the season in the slot. But Noel's going to be breathing down his neck all year, and he's coming up on his late 20s. I'm just not the biggest fan of Kirk. I think him being traded for a 7th-round pick kind of shows what his value is. And considering Noel goes as a 3rd-round pick, I just find it hard to believe that if Noel isn't coming out as a talented player and that they don't believe in him, that they're not going to give Noel the job at least halfway through the season. So that's kind of my issue with Kirk. I think he is definitely being a lot overdrafted. I got him about 20 slots lower than he's currently going right now. But looking at the tight ends, Dalton Schultz, got him as my tight end 23. He's going as a tight end 29. I don't love him, but he's shown to produce in the past. It's going to be a high volume offense. If I'm projecting them to have 33 passing touchdowns, Schultz could easily be a beneficiary of some of these. I think he's a solid backup, a solid guy for best ball. You can play him on your tight ends bye week. So nothing too much about Schultz. There is the worry that Cade Stover does take over. But I do think that as long as Schultz is the starting tight end in this offense, that he is going to have some standalone value and will provide some weeks where he goes for 5 catches, 50 yards on a touchdown. Looking at the strength of schedule and kind of how these playoff games are looking for the Texans, quarterback, they have the 12th easiest schedule for Stroud. So that looks good for him, a little bit higher than average. And that pairs well with the 5th easiest schedule for wide receivers and 10th easiest schedule for tight ends. So this passing offense should eat this season. And I think they are going to rely on it heavily because that is the strength of their team. And them having an easier schedule, at least just based off what we saw last year in the NFL, I think is going to bode very well for the game script that they're going to want to implement for this season. And then you pair that with their running back schedule being the 29th easiest, also would be the 4th hardest. So they're going to be playing some really tough run defenses, and they're not going to be able to run the ball even against those easy run defenses. So I would not be surprised if we're seeing CJ Stroud put up Baker Mayfield numbers last year with 4,000 plus yards, 35 or 40 touchdowns, but also, double-digit interceptions and a lot of pass attempts. So I think it's a good schedule for the pass catchers and for the passing game, but for the rushing attack, it's not looking good continuously. Their playoff schedule is absolutely the best that I have seen out of any team that we've done so far. You have week 15 at home against the Arizona Cardinals, who are not a great defense, but are also a good offense, which means this could be a shootout of a game. But what I also want you to remember is that the Houston Texans play in a dome, which means that you don't have to worry about the snow or the rain or any other weather that's going to come about that you might see in Buffalo or Philadelphia or Kansas City. You get a beautiful day inside the dome where weather will not be a factor. And then you do week 16 also at home against the Las Vegas Raiders, another team that has an awful defense, but has a good offense. And it could be another, shootout of a game. And then week 17, you play in LA against the Chargers, who they have a solid defense, but the offense is the strength of their team. And the offense is on both sides are going to be battling. Last year in the playoffs, the Texans won 32-12. Chargers are going to want revenge. It's going to be a game where I assume both teams are going to be in playoff contention, and it's definitely going to matter. And it's definitely going to, give that team confidence, whoever wins going into the playoffs. So I think these 3 games, if I'm looking at the playoff schedule, this is an A+. I am targeting Houston Texans players. If you are mid-season and you're like, I'm going to make the playoffs for sure, go out and get one of these Texans receivers that they are performing this season, because their schedule is so light down the line. And I think this is the best situation possible for CJ Stroud and what he can do for you in the fantasy playoffs if you are to make it there. And of course, if you have a Lamar or a Josh Allen, you're not going to start CJ Stroud. But, if you're not getting one of those top guys, CJ Stroud is going to be a league winning option, going as the quarterback 17 right now and seeing what this schedule can present, because he might not even start majority of games for you, but he might start those playoff games for you. But before we cap off this episode, just covering the miscellaneous, storylines. We talked about the running back snap shares with Mixon's injury. How is that going to work out? We talked about the receiver snap shares, with Christian Kirk and Noel, and how that's going to work. I think with this offensive line and what we've seen out of training camp so far is that they're going to go balls to the wall with it. They're going to trust them. And the best thing about this O-line is that the only good thing I would say is that they get to go up against this elite defensive line with Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter in preseason. And these tackles can get good exposure because you're not going to play a better defensive line than the Houston Texans. So they're at least going to be getting some really good reps on that side and in camp and seeing if they can at least get ready for the season. But if I had to be honest, I will say that is going to be the deterrent of their season, and why I think that they could end up not winning the division, and why a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars could beat them just with the Texans coming out, having a first place schedule from the season before, them not having the offensive line to protect Stroud. And the thing that you have to realize that NFL offenses every year, if you look at all the bad offenses, you can usually find one common ground between all of them, and it is typically that their offensive line is not good. So will this O-line prevail? I'm not exactly sure, but I think that with these new receivers, and I think with an adjustment, knowing that this offensive line is going to be this poor, I do expect the Texans to have a big step up from last year, and that is going to be led by CJ Stroud. But hopefully you guys all enjoyed this episode 11 of the 32 team series. Definitely go check out all the rest of our episodes at Leatherbrains Podcast on YouTube and hit that subscribe button as well. We just posted the Titans last episode. Really good episode as well, so check that out. And then check out the rest of our accounts: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Leatherbrains. And then be in tune for our next episode, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let me know in the comments if you want me to talk about anything else in these videos or highlight any previous stats, previous advanced analytics, whatever it might be. Hopefully you all enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.